This house in California that has been hiding something for over 100 years. Something far more uncomfortable than ghosts and curses. The woman who built it was one of the most brilliant people of her era, and the story told about her for a century was invented by carnival workers 7 months after she died. What was really found inside those walls is something else entirely. The room that was never supposed to be found in 2015. A man named Walter Magnuson walked into one of America's most famous buildings and noticed something that hundreds of thousands of visitors before him had completely missed. Magnuson was the new general manager of the Winchester Mystery House in San Jose, California, and on one of his first days on the job, he started asking a very simple question. Why were so many doors locked? What he found over the next 2 years permanently changed how researchers, historians, and the general public understand this building and the woman who built it. By May of 2017, his team had opened 40 previously sealed or forgotten spaces throughout the house. Behind those locked doors were rooms with jewel-colored wallpaper still vibrant after a century of isolation, stained glass windows inexplicably mounted at waist height, and secret balconies that no tour guide had ever described to a visitor. Magnuson told Atlas Obscura directly, "There's very possibly things we haven't discovered yet, just because we don't have blueprints." The single most dramatic find came in 2016, when the preservation team discovered a sealed attic space that had been completely closed off since Sarah Winchester died in September of 1922. They called it the Daisy Room, named after the pattern of daisy flowers pressed into the glass of its windows. The contents of that room stopped the team cold. Sitting inside were a pump organ, a Victorian couch, a dress form, a sewing machine, and several paintings, all arranged as if someone had simply stepped out for a moment and planned to return shortly. The room had been untouched for nearly a century. That discovery pushed the official room count of the house to 161, and it raised a question that nobody in a century of tourism, legend, and Hollywood movies had ever seriously tried to answer. If this house was genuinely the product of a mad woman building randomly to confuse ghosts, then why did every sealed room contain evidence of careful, deliberate purpose? Why was every hidden space designed with intention? The answer to that question is darker, more fascinating, and far more human than any ghost story. And to understand it properly, you first have to understand exactly who Sarah Winchester really was, because almost everything you have ever heard about her is wrong. The most brilliant woman nobody talked about here is what the tourist brochures never tell you. The woman who built the Winchester Mystery House was not an uneducated widow who lost her mind to grief. She was one of the most formally educated women in the entire United States during the 1800s. She stood 4 feet 10 inches tall. She spoke Latin, French, Spanish, and Italian fluently by the age of 12, and she had studied mathematics, science, and Shakespeare at an institution directly affiliated with Yale College at a time when most women were not permitted anywhere near a university. A contemporary of Sarah's named Merle H. Gray wrote something remarkable about her that historians have largely ignored for a century. Gray stated, "Perhaps not more than a dozen people in California know that Mrs. Winchester is a musician with a genius for composition, that she is a remarkable businesswoman, that she is a French scholar, that her philanthropies alone would make her a national figure if they were known, that she is a full-fledged architect familiar with the building peculiarities of all countries." Read that again slowly. A full-fledged architect, familiar with the building peculiarities of all countries. Sarah Lockwood Pardee was born on the 4th of June, 1839, in New Haven, Connecticut. Her father, Leonard, held regular gatherings with prominent abolitionists and freethinkers, and the family openly discussed suffrage, animal rights, and the abolition of slavery at a time when those were radical positions. Sarah grew up in a household where independent thinking was not just tolerated but actively encouraged. She married William Ward Winchester on the 30th of September, 1862. William was the son of Oliver Winchester, the man who had built one of the most powerful weapons companies in American history. The Winchester repeating rifle was already becoming legendary by the time Sarah joined the family, described by many as the gun that won the West. The fortune connected to that rifle would define every remaining year of Sarah's life in ways she never anticipated. The tragedies came fast and without mercy. Their daughter Annie was born on the 15th of June, 1866, and died just 6 weeks later on the 24th of July from a severe nutritional deficiency. Sarah never had another child. Her mother died in May of 1880. Her father-in-law, Oliver Winchester, died in December of 1880, and then on the 7th of March, 1881, William himself died of tuberculosis at 43 years old. In 3 years, Sarah lost her mother. LL, blue-walled chamber that tour guides have called the seance room for over 100 years. The story told to visitors is specific and dramatic. Every night at midnight, the legend goes, a bell tower would ring to summon the spirits of the dead. Sarah Winchester would enter this room and remain there until 2 in the morning, receiving instructions from those spirits about what to build next. Her father-in-law, her husband, and her only child. She was 41 years old. She was one of the wealthiest women in the country, and she was completely alone. The inheritance she received is one of the most distorted facts in the entire Winchester legend. Historian Mary Jo Ignafo spent nearly 2 decades researching Sarah's actual financial records, and her findings completely contradict the tourist attraction mythology. The commonly repeated figure of $20 million and $1,000 per day in income was invented by tour guides and promotional materials, not by any documents Sarah actually signed. Sarah Winchester was not a woman controlled by grief or guilt or supernatural fear. She was a businesswoman, an investor, a designer, and a builder. When she arrived in California around 1884 and eventually purchased a farmhouse on 45 acres in San Jose in 1886, she was not fleeing ghosts. She was making a calculated real estate decision in a growing region that her physicians had recommended for her worsening rheumatoid arthritis. Before you can understand what the Winchester Mystery House really is, you need to understand exactly how the lie about it was constructed, who built that lie, and why that lie has outlasted the truth for over a century. The lie that carnival workers sold the world the very first piece of mythology appeared in a San Jose newspaper called the Evening News in 1895. The article described Sarah as a woman who believed she would die when her house was finished and therefore kept building forever. It was gossip. It was printed without any documentation, without any interview with Sarah herself, and without a single named source. In 1967, a writer named Susie Smith published a book called Prominent American Ghosts. In that book, Smith introduced a specific story that had never appeared in any document before. She claimed a Boston medium named Adam Coons had told Sarah Winchester that she was cursed by the spirits of everyone killed by Winchester rifles, and that the only way to protect herself was to move west and build continuously. This story has been repeated so often in the decades since that many people today believe it is a documented historical event. It is not. It was invented in a ghost book 45 years after Sarah died. Ignafo tracked down every available record in New Haven and Boston and found no evidence that any medium named Adam Coons or any variation of that name had ever existed. But the most damaging blow to Sarah's reputation came not from journalists or ghost story writers. It came from the carnival workers who purchased her property. Sarah died on the 5th of September, 1922. When appraisers came to value the property, they considered the earthquake-damaged house essentially worthless as real estate. In April of 1923, a man named John Brown and his wife Mamie signed a lease on the property. John Brown was a roller coaster designer. His wife Mamie became the first tour guide. The tourist operation opened on the 30th of June, 1923, with over 10,000 visitors arriving on that first weekend alone. Mamie Brown stood at the front of every tour group and told stories about Sarah Winchester's mental state, her supernatural obsessions, and her desperate attempts to confuse the spirits of the dead. She invented these stories. She had never met Sarah Winchester. The people who had actually known Sarah tried to fight back. Former workers, neighbors, and friends were horrified by what they were reading. They described her to anyone who would listen as clear-headed, financially brilliant, and personally generous. Wikipedia, citing Ignafo's research, records that past neighbors, friends, and workers for Winchester were distressed when they read about superstitious claims being made about the house in Winchester. A carpenter named James Perkins, who had actually worked on the construction, stated explicitly that the more irregular features, which made the house famous, including the staircase to nowhere and the doors to walls, were built after Mrs. Winchester's death. Now here is where the story gets genuinely strange, because the house itself contains answers that go far beyond what the ghost story ever explained. When you remove the supernatural mythology and look at the Winchester Mystery House purely as an engineering problem, a completely different picture emerges. This was not random construction. This was a masterpiece of deliberate design. The fortress disguised as a mansion, the innovations Sarah built into her home were decades ahead of their time. The house featured indoor plumbing with both hot and cold running water, and a working hot water shower at a period in American history when most wealthy households considered indoor plumbing a luxury. She installed a forced air and steam heating system throughout, alongside 47 fireplaces and 17 chimneys. She built a push-button gas lighting system powered by her own carbide gas generator, which the Winchester Mystery House website describes as truly revolutionary for private residents of that era. She installed 3 separate elevators, including an Otis electric model that is believed to have been among the first residential elevators on the West Coast. She built an annunciator, which was an early intercom system with a master board in the staff quarters, so that when Sarah pressed a button in any room, a card dropped in the servants' area identifying exactly where she was. She designed a conservatory with automatic watering devices, slanted floors, and trapdoors that piped excess water directly to her outdoor gardens, making it one of the earliest documented residential water recycling systems in California. Colin Dickey, the author of Ghostland who grew up near the house, argued that Sarah could be considered an architectural pioneer of her time, and pointed out that her project was unusual for a woman to look after such a project. That framing matters enormously. A man who supervised a construction project of this complexity for 36 years, while incorporating cutting-edge technology, would be celebrated as a visionary engineer. Sarah Winchester was dismissed as insane, but the most significant engineering achievement in the entire house has nothing to do with elevators or intercom systems. It has to do with earthquakes. On the 18th of April, 1906, one of the most devastating earthquakes in American history struck the San Francisco Bay Area at an estimated magnitude of 7.9. Before that morning, the Winchester House stood 7 stories tall. The quake destroyed the upper floors, the central tower, and several chimneys. But the core of the structure survived. The house survived because Sarah Winchester had built it with what engineers would later recognize as a compensated foundation, a construction approach in which the structure is not rigidly attached to its brick base, allowing the building to shift and absorb seismic energy rather than fracturing under it. This is the same fundamental principle that underlies modern earthquake-resistant construction. Sarah Winchester applied it to a private residence in the 1880s, decades before earthquake engineering existed as a formal discipline. The house survived the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake as well. The same structure, the same foundation, still standing. The staircases that climb toward ceilings, the doors that open onto blank walls, the hallways that turn without apparent reason, the windows built into floors. Every single one of these features that tour guides have described for a century as signs of madness has a structural and practical explanation that has nothing to do with ghosts. Sarah Winchester House historian Janin Bohm told reporters that Sarah did what was necessary to make the structure safe and watertight after the earthquake, deliberately choosing not to restore the upper floors to their original height. That was not grief or trauma. That was a calculated architectural decision by a woman who understood her own building. The seance room was never a seance room of all the rooms in the Winchester Mystery House. The one that has generated the most mythology is a SMA.